Hi and welcome. Here, Rajesh and me, Jaimit, we talk to some of the best brains and thinkers that we've had the privilege of knowing. This is a leisurely long format, so sit back, relax, grab a drink, and welcome once again. Over to you, Rajesh.
Thank you, Jaimit. Our guest today is Professor Anindya Ghose from New York University, Stern. We are delighted to welcome Anindya. So Anindya is one of the most accomplished people that you will find across diverse disciplines. Of course, he's a master at business analytics. He runs the program at NYU Stern, author of a book on the mobile economy. I think it's a great read. The book is called Tap, Inside the Mobile Economy. And of course, he's an accomplished high-range mountaineer. All set, welcome Anindya. And I think we are ready to go.
Oh, well, thank you, Rajesh. Thanks, Jaimit. Looking forward to it.
So there are diverse areas we could begin, but I thought the first area that we could dig deeper into is you've had a ringside view of the changing world of adtech and martech. As a professor, as a consultant to lots of companies globally, and as a consultant to some of the big tech companies. So what have been the sort of big trends of the past, which are now evolving? How do you see it going forward? So the words of adtech and martech.
Sure, yeah. So I think I would start by saying that for the longest time, adtech and martech were considered as, two different silos. There was very little conversation about any sort of convergence between them. Which is now changing dramatically. In fact, we've come up with a new term called, mad tech, which is basically the combination of martech and adtech, right? So I think that's the bottom line. But let me sort of, go back maybe a few years and see how all of this has evolved, right? So adtech essentially, came into play, I would say about 10 years or so back, roughly. One of the, the most prominent sort of developments in that space was Google's acquisition of an ad exchange called DoubleClick, right? If you go back in time, one of the things that Google accomplished over time is putting what we call an end-to-end integrated ad tech stack that would essentially change the way ads are bought and sold from a world where, we had these manual sort of buy and sell process between two individuals on the brand side and the publisher side, into a world that is completely driven by algorithms and ads are bought and sold programmatically. And so we started hearing the word programmatic marketing, programmatic advertising. The idea is that algorithms powered by machine learning and various AI technologies would replace the work that human beings would do, primarily because of the efficiency and the scale that these technologies could provide, right? So in the same time that a human being could negotiate the price and sale of one ad contract, which would roughly take 2 hours over a lunch meeting, with lots of martinis and cool other snacks and drinks, the algorithm would have accomplished the selling and the buying of millions of transactions of ad contracts. Now, this was very quickly opening the door for many new players to enter this market. In fact, there's a company called Luma Landscape that portrays how the ad tech market looks like, and it was very fragmented. We saw several across the world, primarily driven in the US, but then very quickly moving on to China as well. We saw the emergence of several fragmented, small, medium players in this space, right? And that essentially what that did is we saw several entities with distinct USPs, unique selling capabilities, I would say, emerge in that space. We have DSPs and SSPs and ad exchanges, DMPs, etc. And I would say for the longest time, that's how things started evolving until, maybe 2 or 3 years back, we started seeing the advent of fraud of different kinds, right? There's different kinds of ad fraud perpetrated by bots that masquerade as human beings. And to the point where in 2020, I think it's safe to say that anywhere from 20% to 25% of digital advertising on the internet is susceptible to fraud. And I think susceptible is a euphemism here. Fraud does happened quite a bit. So I think the next big trend in the ad tech side is, figuring out how to deal with ad fraud. And there we have seen the emergence of, blockchain-based companies that can help alleviate some of these issues. So I sit on the board of a company called Lucidity, which is based in Los Angeles. And they've had a good amount of success in using, their blockchain-based technologies to kind of remove ad fraud or alleviate ad fraud, I would say. And I think that's probably how I would summarize, the evolution of the ad tech world. Now martech is very different, right? So if you take a step back, what's the main difference between ad tech and martech, right? The main difference is, advertising is generally meant for people who you've not yet figured out if they are your customers, right? You're trying to maximize reach. So you're essentially trying to do what we call a spray and pray mentality. martech, on the other hand, is typically meant for customers who've already shown some interest in you, right? So in other words, in terms of targeting, ad tech is what we call one-to-many, and martech is one-to-one, right? You have some location information or a name, demographic, address, etc. Ad tech is typically paid media. martech is typically been unpaid media, right? There are differences in billing processes, and in the ad tech world, typically the billing works on a commission or a fixed payment. In martech, we see a lot of software as a service, usually a fixed price bill monthly, and so on. So companies basically thought of these two as very separate toolkits. One that is meant to essentially maximize your reach. The other is essentially honing it down to a smaller set of people. What you're now seeing is that the boundaries are blurring. Okay, the boundaries are blurring where ad tech and martech are now essentially converging, and some of the advances in technologies are essentially enabling that convergence. Okay, so I think in summary, I would say that I see the following big trends. So in the ad tech world, I see the emergence of blockchain as a means to combat ad fraud. In the martech world, I see a tremendous amount of cloud-based automation. And Rajesh and Jaimit, obviously as part of NetCore, you know that very well. And the third big trend I would say is the convergence of ad tech and martech, where a brand can no longer, I would say, afford to think of them as silos. It has to figure out a holistic way to integrate the two.
And I'm assuming AI would play a very important role in all of this because you're collecting a lot of data, which then can be analyzed by machines now in a much bigger way than was possible earlier.
Oh yeah, certainly. And I would sort of take a step back and say, even before we talk about AI, let's just talk about machine learning, right? Because the word AI is often kind of loosely interpreted, but let's just think about mechanisms or models that can integrate, right? So in the world of data science, if we take a step back, I would say there's these two primary mechanisms for making meaningful use of data. One is what we refer to as causal modeling. The other is referred to as predictive modeling. So causal modeling is where companies who have in-house resources in statistical modeling or econometric modeling or experiments or A/B testing, those are kind of toolkits that help you enable causal modeling. Whereas predictive modeling is where machine learning comes in, data mining, forecasting, right? Now, before any of this can be done, one of the things that many organizations don't realize is that they have to spend time and resources in what I call data engineering. The part of the part of data science that's not maybe considered very cool, or at least it's not front end facing, it's back end work, and that's why maybe it's not considered cool, is the part where you really have to spend a considerable amount of time in cleaning the data, processing it, querying it, so that the raw data, which is usually very dirty, has missing variables or missing observations, etc. The raw data can be processed in a way so that the statisticians and the data miners can unleash their models. Okay. So to your point, Rajesh, about integration of data, right? This is where data engineering comes in. Okay. And in my experience in working and advising corporations all over the world, in the US, Europe, Asia, and other parts of the world, I've seen that the C-suite doesn't often sort of either inadvertently or for other reasons, doesn't give enough emphasis on this discipline of data engineering. And if you don't, then what happens is either you end up processing what we call dirty data, right? Dirty data has missing observations or unbalanced panels, for example, or you end up processing biased data. And they're both bad outcomes, right? Because with dirty data, you're going to end up getting estimates that are highly overestimated or underestimated. And with biased data, then you run a long-term risk of whether it's targeting or through adtech or targeting through martech, to end up sending messages to people that becomes an echo chamber, right? So it sort of this brings us to the issue of biases in AI and algorithms. So my advice to the C-suite is, while it's important to hire the causal modelers and the predictive modelers, it's imperative that you spend time and resources in hiring the data engineers, the people and the back end who are trained to clean, process, query, and store your data in the right way.
So you were also coming from machine learning to AI, and AI has its own set of challenges as you see them. And I do believe that you have a construct around how one should look at AI and how one can use AI. So if you could throw some light on that.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll start by what my vision of an AI-led business organization should look like, right? So let's say at the core, your final goal with this, having AI-led enterprise is enhancing this data-driven decision-making culture, right? So I'm a big fan of that, and I think there's enough evidence that organizations who do this in the short and medium and long term, they actually end up winning, as opposed to those who don't. Now, so how do you establish an AI-based organization, right? So I start by emphasizing the role of people. So I talked just a while back about two kinds of people, right? The people who can clean the data and the people who can process the data, okay, using models. So the cleaners are the data engineers who are removing the biases and all sorts of unbalances in the data or missing observations. And then you've got the processors, the data modelers, who are unleashing their statistical, experimental, or predictive models. There's also a third component in all of this, which is what I refer to as the storytellers, the people who actually understand enough of what's going on to be able to figure out what are the right questions to ask and what are the right data sets to tap into. Okay. And these are what I call the data translators. The storytellers are what I call the translators, because they have a very important role of translating the conversation between the engineers and the business folks, so that the C-suite at the top can actually make meaningful sense of what's going on. So to your question, Jaimit, I think it's imperative that for an AI-led organization that, besides, of course, the infrastructural requirements, such as figuring out, the software or whether you're going to have this in-house or you're going to outsource it, right? Those are strategic decisions, right? But my sort of recommendation is always to focus on the people. It is the people that can make or break the organization. And I can give you, tons of examples of this, where organizations had tremendous access to resources like data and infrastructure, but they just didn't have the right people, and so the execution suffered. And maybe when we get to the topic of how technology companies are succeeding, we can come back to this.
So I just want to hold you, and the thought that you're saying is very interesting. You're saying cleaners, then you have the algo guys who try and massage it, or I don't know, get some magic out of it. But very interestingly, what you speak about are storytellers. I think most of us, when we try and expect it, and when we first had a brush with it, we expect the algos to go in, get into a black box, and some magic is going to happen and everything's going to be automatic. But I think what you rightly said, that at some point of time, data can come in various formats, and the stories it tells is worth interpreting, it's worth understanding. My big takeaway is that these storytellers are extremely, extremely important in addition to what you're already saying. And is this a trend, or what are the kind of skill sets that you require to be a storyteller? Or how do I figure out that this is the right storyteller for me?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jaimit. So, and I'll take you back to one of my many hats. One of my many hats at NYU is I'm the director of NYU Stern's Master of Science in Business Analytics program. So we started this about 7 years back, and I've been meaningfully involved right from the beginning in this program. So I run the program. I also run the capstone program for the MSBA students. The capstone is a 1-year experiential project where our students in different teams get embedded inside companies, helping them convert the company from a traditional into a data-driven organization and eventually into an AI-driven enterprise. Okay. Now, as we started this program, we had initially focused on, the data engineers, the cleaners, and the data modelers, the processors. It occurred to us over time that, one of the most important skill sets is the ability of individuals to figure out what is the most important question that an organization should be thinking about. Okay? And if we are to make this organization a data-driven enterprise, right, this individual or a set of individuals have to figure out by simply eyeballing the data, staring at the data, what are the right questions to ask and what are the possibilities. So around the same time, we saw the emergence of a new field of science called data visualization. And in the beginning, it was sort of somewhat ad hoc, but now it's a full-blown, well-established discipline, data visualization. So in my opinion, the storyteller is one who can truly sort of, visualize the questions by literally, kind of eyeballing and staring the data, spending some time figuring out what's inside it, without like literally touching it in some meaningful way. So how do you train these people? I mean, there's two ways. One is, of course, ask them to take courses or enroll in like these programs, such as the MSBA program. And now, most of the top, I would say, 20 universities in the US have a thriving MSBA program, right? So you've got a lot of choices. And I think some of these are beginning to emerge in India as well, but maybe not in as much of a systematic way, but it's a matter of time, it's going to happen. I think the second thing really is, domain expertise. So I've realized that over time, the really good storytellers have one thing that is key, which is that they have a lot of domain expertise. And this makes it somewhat of a dilemma because, if I'm going to become a storyteller, right? So I take this fancy MSBA program from some fancy university in the world. But then do I become a specialist in one domain so that I can get the domain expertise, or do I become more horizontally spread? Like I have a choice of become a vertical domain expert or using my data skills to become a horizontal person. I think that's, like we've seen experts emerge from both, but it's a really important question. I don't think there is a black and white answer there, which is if horizontal application of skills is better than vertical or other way around. But that's how I would, look at your question. How do you become a good storyteller? So you need obviously exposure to the right set of courses, hopefully through a right program. And then B is the onus is on you to figure out whether you want to be a vertical domain expert or a horizontal domain expert.
So one question, Anindya, in what you have seen over the years, who have been the best storytellers?
So I think the core skill, Rajesh, is actually not a hard quant skill, it's a soft skill. So what I mean by that is the best storytellers are the ones who are most comfortable standing in front of an audience and telling the story. It literally is that. And this is also something people have asked, like how do you make somebody, goes back to Jaimit's question, how do you become a good storyteller? I think some skills are, maybe inborn, right? They're innate. we do see this self-selection in our world of data science and business analytics. There are some people who are just very comfortable doing the work of the data cleaner and the data modeler, but maybe not coming in front of the end client or the internal team and presenting, okay? Some others are the other way around. They are far more comfortable, standing in front of an audience, whether it's in-house or in a stadium. And they're far more comfortable like telling the story, but they're not as interested or maybe as skilled in cleaning the data or modeling the data. But they need to have enough understanding of how it's done, but maybe not as much hands-on experience. Okay, so we generally see people self-select based on your personality, right? And it's not surprising that if you're more of an introvert, you'll probably want to take the first route of a data modeler or a data cleaner. If you're more of an extrovert, you'll probably take the data storyteller route, right?
The English literature students have, it's their time in the sun now for storytelling, I guess, from all the engineers.
Yeah, Jaimit, some of the biggest tech companies, they're hiring philosophy majors. Right.
Correct.
So here in business school, we are producing a lot of business school graduates, and then a big tech company comes and says, "Hey, do you guys produce any philosophy majors?" And I'm like, okay, not yet, but if that's what you want, we have to reconfigure our curriculum, and have some philosophy courses too.
Philosophy with an elective in data science.
That's correct. Right. It's basically stacking your left brain and the right brain. It's like I see sort of this disruption in the agency world, but maybe I digress. But when you see Accenture Interactive and Deloitte Digital and IBM X trying to disrupt WPP, Omnicom, Publicis, right? Like, to me, I see that as the battle between the right brain and the left brain people. And maybe like this sort of a battle is inevitable in almost every domain. Like as you become more and more data driven. I personally don't at all believe that data is a substitute for creativity. I'm a big fan of complementarity, right? So if I were ever to be an entrepreneur, right, I would hire people from both the camps and constantly make them talk to each other. Because there's tremendous synergies from, working with somebody who's sort of the polar opposite of you. And rather than thinking of intuition and analytics as substitutes, I'm a big believer in complementarity. And I think that's what organizations who do well, they're the ones who win, right?
I think many times what happens is that we tend to look at one or the other. You like to look, okay, we are going to focus on data analytics, data science, so you get more and more of such people. But then I think we miss out on the ability to do the second part of it, which is tell the stories. I think it's a great point.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, thanks for that one. Now, I think one of the other things that I think we've spoken and I found very interesting, where you said there are the 4 tracks on which you see AI running. So if you could speak about them as well, that'll be interesting.
Sure. So I think when we look at the role of AI in the business world, right, there are 4 pillars or 4 verticals. And the way I would look at it, and in fact, some of the very nice writings of Kai-Fu Lee has also informed my own thinking, because I have my own work, in the US and China. So here's the 4 verticals. The first, you have, what I call business AI. Business AI is essentially examples of, large businesses adopting AI for decision making, whether it's insurance companies, financial services, banks, manufacturing companies, et cetera, et cetera. Then you've got consumer AI. Consumer AI is probably the one that most people identify with wherever you are, because I'm talking about, the Amazons and the Alibabas and the Googles and the Baidus and the, WeChat, Tencent, ByteDance, right? Then we have what we call perception AI. Perception AI are companies who are looking at essentially, various sorts of sensors, IoT devices, right? So you look at any sort of facial recognition company. Think of Megvai, Face++ in China, right? Facial recognition is now being adopted in different parts of the world, even in the government sector, right, for detecting crime and so on, law and enforcement. And then you've got autonomous AI. This is basically self-driving cars and drones, right? So whenever you're evaluating the present and the future of any country in the AI space, I think this is a good framework to think about. Like, how do the companies in that country stack up here? So that's my framework, and I can dig deeper, on that.
Yeah. So on this, these are four pillars, as you like to say them, and businesses, I think, traditionally have tried to gain some expertise and have understood the business AI, as you like to say it, in terms of deep learning, unstructured data, and others. It's some of the others that seem fairly out of reach for a lot of traditional firms, as opposed to some, I'm assuming the big tech has their fingers everywhere. But you're looking at how does this play out within the traditional firm and as well as the big tech firm? And globally, do you see emergence of certain companies or certain countries moving in and capturing a lot of the mind space over here?
Yeah, so Jaimit, I would start by saying that the US and China are essentially the leaders in AI, but there's a big difference, right? So the US is the leader today in AI research, and China is a leader today in AI implementation. And the question then becomes, what is the reason for China's success story in AI? Okay, and this is a topic that, from my own personal experience in working with Alibaba and China Mobile and many other JD and Tencent Chinese companies, but also, I've been to China 32 times and for various durations, some short trips, some long trains. It's there in everyday life, right? And if someone has not been there, it's hard to explain. But to your point about, is this something that, is sort of fictitious, or maybe not fictitious, maybe something that's not very concrete. When I walk into a restaurant in China, right, if I made a booking, I don't need to find the host, and they don't need to check my name, right? The camera at the beginning of the restaurant just facially recognize who I am, and they know that I made a booking, and they'll let me in. When I walk into a building in different parts of China, I don't need to show my ID to the guard. The doors will open based on them recognizing my face, the cameras, and automatically let me in. So, in those parts of the world, it's just part and parcel of everyday life. Drones are delivering, goods from e-commerce platforms on a regular basis, and not just in the cities, even in the remotest, mountain villages of China, right? What used to take 4 days for a product to go, and a few hours now is delivered on drones. So you see all of that, and you realize that they're clearly ahead. And in fact, if you look at the 4 verticals, I would say China is ahead of the US obviously in autonomous AI and sensory AI and consumer AI, and the US is ahead in business AI, right? And I think that the question then becomes like, maybe why, and if you think it's relevant, we can talk about that. But I'll stop here and see if you have any follow-ups just based on what we've talked about.
I think 2 questions, Anindya, which would be good to dig deeper into. One is, of course, sure, what has China done differently versus other countries? And second is, what is the hope for countries like India? I mean, are we too late in India? Is there a hope to catch up? And it applies at 2 levels. One is at the government level and also for companies in India.
Sure.
What is it that they can do?
So let me start with China. I see, 4 reasons why China has moved ahead of the rest of the world in the AI implementation. Okay. The first is what I call the GPA ecosystem. So it's not grade point average. The GPA here stands for government, private sector, and academia working in tandem. Okay. It's a remarkable synergy I've not seen anywhere else in the world, where the government, private sector, and academia work in tandem in China. Now, many of the Western narratives, they often trivialize the government's role in China, and it's actually wrong, because support comes in many forms, right? First of all, the central government sets the tone, okay? It's top down. Second of all, they have always believed in what I call the techno-utilitarian policy, meaning that the government will allow any technology innovation to unfold and unleash and implement until and unless they see there is a negative social welfare effect. Okay, it's only then that they will stop you. The third, they have invested, trillions of dollars in infrastructure, very, very cutting edge, infrastructure. Look at the high-speed train network in China. It's probably the best in class in the world. Right? Fourth, I would say government funds in VC-based investing in startups exceeds private sector VC funds. So in China, we have government VC funds about $500 billion. As a private sector VC is about $350 billion. Okay, you don't see that anywhere else in the world, right? Fifth, within that, I would say even from the kindergartens, right? Actually, believe it or not, they have some basic AI in kindergarten textbooks, meaning that at the age of 5, these kids are already being exposed to whatever that animal or beast called AI is. Okay,
Seriously?
So that's the first. Yes, yeah. Just the simple basics like algorithms make decisions, computers can think like human beings, but at the age of 5, that's what they're being exposed to. Right, so that's the first one, GPA, right? The second one, I would say, is China's advantage in data. They have 3 times more mobile users than the US. They have 10 times more users in food delivery. Meituan, the Chinese food delivery company, delivers, I read somewhere like 18 million food orders a day, which is more than the rest of the world put together. They have 50 times the mobile payment users compared to the US, and they take bicycle rides, they have 300 times more users. So huge data advantage. The third is speed. They are just fast. They fail fast, they fail early, and they fail often. That's their mantra, like the Y Combinator mantra. They're very fast to find market opportunities, build products, and then pivot when needed, right? Like when I've sat in high-level boardroom meetings or senior executive meetings in China, I've been stunned by the speed of decision making, in these meetings. And unlike what people might say that it's only just top down, or it's not as one-sided. It's fairly democratic. They just move fast. Okay, so I think speed of decision making is really, really key. Fourth and the final, I would say consumers. Consumer behavior incentivizes innovation. Now, why do I say that? Well, first of all, consumers are very open to sharing their data with firms. Okay, and maybe we can talk about that privacy angle subsequently. They are very fast adopters of new products, and they provide ample feedback. The fierce competition between the startups then pushes entrepreneurs to improve at lightning speed based on that fast feedback from consumers. They end up producing very easy to interface products, which is a lot more convenient. Like just compare, almost any of their tech products across the world. They just are good at producing these easy interfaces. Okay, so I would say those are the 4 reasons, right? So consumer behavior that incentivizes rapid innovation, speed of decision making, the data advantage, and then this GPA ecosystem, the government, private sector, academia working in tandem. Those are the reasons why China has moved ahead.
And what can be, the other part of Rajesh's question is that countries like India, how does it work for them? Or I don't know, we hear about Vietnam or any other such countries. Is it game over? Is there a way to level this playing field? Is there a way to catch up?
Yeah, and I certainly, there's just, I don't think at all that it's game over. I think we still, in India, there's a tremendous amount of benefits that can accrue from an AI first policy. What's not clear in my mind is how do you actually effectively implement it? Like who are the stakeholders? Should it be a government mandated policy, or should the private sector sort of take the initiatives and invest, or should it be some sort of consortium that's a combination of academia, private sector, and the government? We see that in China. In the US, it's really more the private sector and academia. That's why the research component is being pushed. in China, the government plays a role such that the execution and implementation gets expedited. So I think, in India, we have to figure out, this is going to be a multi-stakeholder consortium, right? This is not going to be just one entity. I don't have a good sense for, who will be the specific players in this consortium, but my recommendation would be to draw on, players from academia, private sector, and the government, policy experts, and start the conversation. Excuse me. I think there's a lot that can be done because, there is something called a second mover advantage where you learn from the wins and the losses of the first movers. Okay? And I think, and not just to sort of have China as an example, I think there are other parts of the world too, where, think of Israel, right? If you've been to Israel, it's another mind-blowing story. The quality and the cutting edge startups coming from Israel, I would say they go neck to neck with the Chinese and the American startups in innovation and quality, if not better. I mean, I've been blown away. We're doing some work with a very interesting Israeli startup called Mura that collects all kinds of mobile data, and I've been blown away by how sophisticated they are. So I think, in India, there is a few different countries we can learn our lessons from. We just have to figure out very quickly, sooner than later, that this has to be a rapid mandate. The government, for sure, one thing we know is they have to promise to invest, massive amounts, inject massive amounts of funds. They have to incentivize, whether it's through creating more jobs or paying higher salaries or subsidizing university education so that more people can enroll. It has to be a multi-pronged attack, but the government has to play a role.
So one question, Anindya, I mean, in terms of, if we go back to the theme around the AI first business,
yeah,
we had spoken about the types of people which are required, but if you go to the CEO of a company, I mean, a traditional company or a new age company, I mean, they're very different worlds, but let's take traditional companies. The challenge for them is now they have to go digital. There is no two ways about it.
Right.
What would be your advice to them if you had to talk to the CEO of a company and say, look, we got to get AI first. What does that really mean? How do I measure? How do I know I'm on the path of being AI first as a business?
Yeah, I think the simplest thing would be to first have a conversation about what aspects of your businesses are happening through digital versus through the traditional or analog or offline world, right? Like you said, I mean, this is not a choice anymore, right? You need to have a very substantial and strong digital presence. And, if you haven't jumped on that train yet, hopefully it's not too late, but now is the time. It's not tomorrow, it's today. So I think I'll start with that. Now, suppose the answer to that is, yes, we do have a digital presence, then I'm going to be, peeling the layers of the onion and digging deeper and say, okay, so when you say that, what do you mean? Are you present on one platform? Let's say you have an presence on Instagram and Facebook, or are you present on multiple platforms, right? Then I'm going to be starting to look at least different cross-functional disciplines. Let's look at marketing and advertising first, right? What aspects of your marketing and advertising are digitally enabled? And B, are you using the data that is coming out from these campaigns to go back and change any sort of decision, whether it's pricing or advertising or marketing, and so on and so forth. Then I'd have a conversation with the ops team and say, what aspects of your supply chain is digitally transformed? And this is especially true in a post-COVID world where, this is not a choice anymore, right? Now, once enough of, the organization is what I call digitally transformed or digitally enabled, then that you have access to data because, this digital is the primary source of raw data. That's when that there is a basic infrastructure that is needed for an AI-enabled organization that is already being put in place. And if not, then that's where you have to start putting in place, right? You have to start putting in place an infrastructure that comes from a digitally enabled organization. Now, suppose the answer to that is yes, we have that data, then my third question would be, like I said, the most important resource is people. Do you have the right set of people? And then I'll fall back on the framework. Do you have the data cleaners, the data modelers, and the storytellers, right? And depending on the answer, right, we can proceed further and say, this is how you need to change your hiring or promotion or incentivize, new talent, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there's a very clear, this tree-level decision-making, Rajesh. Honestly, none of this is, rocket science, right? Like we might, someone like me might say, oh yeah, this is very complicated just so that I can get more attention, but honestly, it's not, right? I think, there's a very clear roadmap, and if you have the will as a C-suite, if you have the will, you can really do it. And I think for better or worse, it's not a choice anymore. Right?
Mm-hmm. One of the questions which always comes up when you talk to companies is that customers are reluctant to share data. So there are all these privacy issues, all sorts of questions start coming up. Right. You've written extensively. You've run a lot of real world tests around these things. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so Rajesh, is a very interesting point, something very close to my heart. Even like 15 years back, or 16 years now, when I first started my academic career as an assistant professor at NYU, right? I started noticing this disconnect between what people say and what they actually do. Okay, those were the early days of the internet, and other than a handful of pioneers and first movers, most people were reluctant to do anything on the internet, like any transaction or any purchase, because they had concerns. They had privacy concerns, security concerns, all sorts of things. And one of the things that we started noticing was that, people would say that they have all these concerns about what's going to happen with my data. And yet, a large fraction of the same people who express this concern would actually end up doing the opposite. They would happily generate content. They would happily, sort of share their data and so on and so forth. So when we started noticing that disparity, right, I think a lot of my research started digging deeper into what might be going on. And one of the things that came out was that there's an increasing belief over time amongst large segments of the world population that, maybe the data they're generating is an asset that belongs to them, and they should be able to exchange their data in return for some concrete benefit. Just like I can sell my used car or my home or my used laptop, whatever. If I can share my data or let's say, quote unquote, sell it, then I should expect something back in return. And that's the kind of thinking that has motivated large fractions of people. It generally skews younger because the younger people are more aware, they're more tech savvy, they also are more activist, so they believe in this philosophy. And when I started noticing that psychology, then it occurred to me that, one of the things I've written in my book is how brands can become your butler and not the stopper, right? So companies who can take your data and really do very cool things for you because, you expect that from them, they're the one who's winning, right? On conversely, if you end up crossing a certain line, then you become this creepy stopper, that cool butler anymore, right? But fundamentally, what enables this ecosystem to thrive is that consumers are increasingly willing to share their data in return for some benefit. That benefit could be convenience, or it could be something more substantial like economic discount, a lower price, a better curated content, a more targeted ad, so that, and there's various sorts of benefits out there. But, let's be clear that for anybody who says that, consumers are being forced to do this or they're not willing, I think they haven't really looked at the science and the data that's going on. And the reality is that substantial fractions of people willingly and consciously are, engaging in this transaction. They see the benefits, right? So they see that by sharing their data and by the brands acting in a trustworthy manner, in a reciprocating in a trustworthy manner, it's a win-win, right? So I think that's an important aspect of what's going on. The other, of course, is, you know, when it comes to like the whole interplay between content and advertising, you know, there's again substantial portions of the society that believe that if 97 or 99% of the content of the internet is free, right, I don't want to pay a subscription fee, then it's okay for me to be exposed to ads. I may find them annoying after a certain point, but I'd rather take that, right, than have to pay for content. And I think the same goes for, you know, other kinds of monetization as well.
So in some ways as well, a lot of, I agree with you that consumers are giving in a lot of data, but I just want to hold you on that argument because at some point of time, companies, governments, etc., would end up having large repositories of data, and that would give them significant leverage. Now, there are both sides of the coin that I'm getting a lot of benefit out of it, but there is also a little fear in the mind that should somebody actually have so much leverage over you, whether you want to give it or not, whether you should be afraid. What is your stand on that?
Yeah, no, I definitely understand the concern that some people might have about either government getting your data or companies getting your data. And I think that, you know, the concerns or the potential risk that these people feel is very different. And there are many parts of the world where the concern from the government getting your data may be more than the concern from companies getting your data, right? And you could ask the two people, one in the US and one in China, and they're going to give you different answers, right? So I think what is important is two things, right? It's absolutely, I believe in this whole butler sucker thing. I think it's very important for companies to realize that they have to act, you know, responsibly with my data. They have to be professional, because I think, you know, if you end up doing something that is very short term, where there might be a temptation to let me try to maximize the surplus I can get from a consumer, right, in the short term, by abusing your data, right, then I think that's not going to be sustainable for the long term, right? Consumers will basically discard this brand and company, move on to the next competitor. It provides a much more sustainable long-term strategy. I think it's also important to recognize for these consumers on the other side that the vast majority of organizations are, you know, cognizant of their responsibility that comes from the power that they have, which comes from access to data. And, you know, I've written about this in my book as well, that, you know, most organizations, there's very little incentive for them to intentionally abuse your data. What happens is, the reality is, you know, we are in an adversarial world where you've got good people and you've got the bad actors. You know, the bad actors here, the hackers or the security breachers, right? So every organization, the bigger you get, the more you will be vulnerable to these bad actors. Okay. Now, companies are trying their level best to kind of invest in resources to, you know, kind of protect your security and so on. But I think as a consumer, in some ways, you know, you have to sort of bite that bullet and say, if 9 out of 10 times I get the benefit of a lower price, then I have to accept that 1 in 10 times maybe there may be a potential threat to my security rather, from a hacker or a breacher. That's the way I would look at it.
So in a way, what you're saying is, if I can get better price or personalization with my permission, okay, privacy is less of an issue, and I'm willing to part with it very graciously, part with my data very graciously.
Yes, that is what the data tells us, that, you know, the best is what we call, the best framework is notice and choice. Notice and choice means, as an organization, notify consumers that your data is being collected, and then give people a choice whether they want to opt in to engage in this data sharing exchange where consumers benefit through companies giving them better prices or better products, or you opt out. Okay. So I'll give you an example. Like, we've carried out these massive randomized experiments in some of the largest shopping malls in the world, right? Now, a shopping mall is a great context where, you can send people the right offer, the right time, at the right place on the right device, because everybody can be reached on their mobile phone. A shopping mall is also where people are already in a shopping sort of mindset, right? Now, you tell somebody that that $500 jacket that you're about to buy can be reduced to 300. If you were to keep your Wi-Fi location data on and let us track your trajectory and send you offers in real time, right? We saw close to 80% of people in a mall that gets 100,000 people a day. 80,000 people are saying, sure, take my location data, and I would much rather pay $200 less of that 40% discount. Sounds fabulous. So I think there's also, now that is obviously different from asking somebody, give me your DNA and dental records and medical records, right? So one thing that, we all have to recognize is that there are different layers of data. Some are what we call more benign and short-term, and some are much more, let's say, potentially fatal or lethal when it comes to, privacy concerns. Now, asking somebody to share their healthcare records or medical, records, that's a far more likely to draw flack or criticism. Whereas asking people to say, hey, keep your location button on, or opt into our email content marketing, or don't install ad blockers, I think that's the easier win for organizations. So this conversation needs to be happening between organizations and just normal people, that we are not out to get you. We just want to make this a win-win for you and me. And think about, these differences across layers of data. We are not asking you to give out your most private information. We're asking you to give something that is fairly benign, at the same time can create a monetary benefit for you and me both.
Understood. I'm just changing track right now, and I'd like to understand that you've obviously worked with a lot of companies, countries across the globe, etc. Sometimes I'm sure you must be quietly frustrated that there is one thing that why doesn't that guy get it, or why don't they get this? And if they just got that, that would have been so much easier. So anything from your past history, past life as an academia or as a consultant that you thought was interesting and extremely frustrating?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Jaimit, I think, if I see a common theme across some of the less satisfactory or more frustrating experiences, I think it's the, what I call the lack of action on, let's say, a recommendation I would make, right? So as I'm sure you've figured out by now, I am a big fan of what I call data-driven decision-making, right? Now, I've been fortunate that, CEOs of several large organizations have reached out to me, and I've helped them take the company on a digital transformation journey. And yet, during the process, I recognized that there was resistance from several important stakeholders to act upon the recommendations that we are making. I think some of that was just behavioral resistance because people felt threatened, right? They have done something in a certain way for many years, and then out comes this, professor from whatever, and who is he to be telling us how to do things, right? And, I've always, the first thing I tell people when I'm retained by a company to help them is that, I'm an ally. Think of me as somebody who's out to empower you and not to replace you or find blemishes or flaws in what you're doing, right? We are a team. And quite often that goes on well, but sometimes it doesn't go down that well. And, I think that often has been frustrating because, I don't come with any particular agenda other than just making this organization more data-driven. I guess the good news, silver lining, Jaimit, is it is increasingly less prevalent, that resistance or that animosity, and increasingly it's more, I would say, friendlier or warmer. And I hope this continues. So yeah, I think that's what I would probably, that's the only thing that comes to mind that is common across the last 20 years of working with organizations.
On that note, I think, Anindya, it's been a fantastic conversation. So if I summarize for me the 3 takeaways, and I'll ask Jaimit to do the same. Storytellers in my team, AI first for my business, and GPA for my country. I think that's the 3 things that stick out for me.
And
I think that's a great summary. Yeah.
It's damn cool, Rajesh. And for me, it's a very, very simple summary. In addition to what you said, tell my daughter who's around 18, please take philosophy. The big tech guys are going to looking for you.
Yes. Train both your left brain and the right brain. Exactly.
Thank you very much, Anindya. Amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Anindya.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, Jaimit, Rajesh, thanks for having me. I enjoyed this a lot, and we're always happy to do this again in the future time.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.